This talk was given by Roshi Rafe Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
Today is Saturday, July 20th, 2024. We'll proceed with Throw Yourself into the House of Buddha, the life and Zen teachings of Tangen Harada Roshi, a really terrifically inspiring book. But before we begin, I want to point out something that has been a slight shift in the Zendo. Quite minor, but just if you're here physically, you'll see it. On Zoom, you only catch glimpses now and then. But typically the way, let me turn this around for a moment. The way we've had the Zendo set up, the front you'll see in the center is the Buddha, and then there's Ananda and Mahakashapa on either side of him. Traditionally, we've had a very small light wood carving of Manjushri, Bodhisattva of wisdom, on a lion holding a sword in front of the Buddha. Then off to the Buddha's right, our left, is Kannon, Bodhisattva, and to the right, our right, the Buddha's left, Manjushri with a sword, a large figure, and a buffalo that was given to Rose and myself by Kapleau-Roshi. However, let me hold that steady for a moment. What I've done is remove, since we already have a Manjushri in the Zendo, I've removed the small white or light wood carving of Manjushri on a lion holding a sword that sat in front of the Buddha, and have put there instead an old, I feel very powerful figure, Tibetan, of the 11-headed Avalokiteshvara, one of the traditional forms of Kannon. There are 33 traditional forms of the Bodhisattva of compassion. This one has 11 heads. The very top one is a Buddha head. Below that is an angry, almost a demonic face. That is the ability to stare down fearlessly all evil, all injustice, all greed, anger, and ignorance. The 10 heads together surmounted by a Buddha head symbolize the 10 directions. Compassion flows in all 10 directions, as well as the 10 stages of the path of the Bodhisattva. Each of these heads is triple. There's a front-facing and a left-facing and a right-facing head on each of them, except the very top one, which is the Buddha head. This is compassion flowing in the three worlds of past, present, future, and also compassion flowing in the worlds of desire, form, and formlessness. The Bodhisattva also has 8 arms, which each with a different one, first set in front in Gasho, complete unity. And then other activities, vases, bows, ropes to tie up egotism, arrows to shoot down, evil action, vases to pour healing, ointment, and medications. This is an image traditionally of tremendously skillful compassion. And given what we are all going to be going through between now and January, I feel that skillful compassion really needs to be our guide. It is, to be honest, going to be a very painful time, a very confusing time, a very sad, potentially, time. And our guide should really be this powerful figure of enlightened, skillful compassion. This is our responsibility to take care of ourselves, to take care of our families, to take care of our world, and to take care of the foundation of it all, which is an ongoing maturing practice of wisdom and compassion. And it will take work and it will be hard. So I've decided to remove the little Manjushri and put this very old, powerful little Tibetan figure of awakened compassion as our guide before the Buddha in our Zendo for the next rest of the year. And hopefully not that much further. So, in any case, let's throw yourself into the house of Buddha. And this begins chapter 24, which is Gratitude of a Cockroach. Not knowing the meaning of human life, most people become engrossed in all sorts of pursuits, trivial things, that they get completely lost in because they are unaware of the one important matter, the great work of awakening to one's true nature. And again, he came to this at a very early age with the sacrifice of his mother's life to give him life and birth, and then his experiences in World War II as he wanted to just serve his nation and be helpful to his people. And during the war, he believed all the rhetoric and signed up as a kamikaze pilot. And just before his first and last flight, the war in the Pacific ended. And he, at that point, was in terrible distress and guilt that he had survived and vowed to dedicate his life to the welfare of all beings. So he doesn't come to this easily. And he says many times in this book, you can't do what I did. My focus was out of so much pain. And it was so necessary to me, but you will have your way and do your way as sincerely as you can. So he goes, not even in their dreams do they imagine that such a great matter, that is awakening to one's true nature, exists, that such important work can be done with this human body, with this life. This inability to meet with the teaching may continue for countless lifetimes. There is an ongoing inability to appreciate this life that we receive, to know gratitude, and to repay our debt of gratitude. I just feel so blessed to be alive. Thanks to the inner harmony, the interdependence of the total universe, I am alive. Everything in the universe is working together, dedicating itself completely so that I am nurtured and protected. Life is bright, life is dear, life is a boundless, priceless, perfect jewel. This seems so hard to believe sometimes, given the world that we live in. So many horrible, painful, disruptive, unfair, unjust things happen. What perspective could he be speaking from? He was not a naive person. He was not a ignorant person. He's not saying this out of blind faith. What is the foundation of someone being able to say this after going through what he went through? It really creates, I think, a very deep question. What is he talking about when he says this? Then he says, you have been born as a human being so you can attain this understanding. Thanks to everything, I have this life. When you finally grasp things in this way, then you are finally fully human. You are indebted deeply to each and every other human being. There are no enemies and no one to be despised. This is so hard to really take in, knowing the world that we live in and the, again, injustices that we see every day that are put upon people so unnecessarily. But he says, when you finally grasp things in this way, you're finally fully human. You're indebted deeply to each and every other human being. There are no enemies and no one to be despised. This is not an idealistic view. I have known even 4-year-olds who are aware of their deep connection with others, grateful for the blessings they receive, and live their lives with this in mind. I know 60-something-year-olds who still hold themselves as to be the dearest in the world, with no time to consider others and spending their days trying to have it easy, eat good food, arrange everything to suit themselves. How about you? Are you reverent toward all of life? Are you grateful to all things? True gratitude is gratitude for all of life, whatever form it may take. How sad it would be to spend this life without appreciation and gratitude. In this modern world, wrapped up in all the luxury and convenience that we have, many people are still unable to appreciate how blessed we are. That is very true in Japan. Our hearts did not become rich when our country became rich. Too much material wealth makes the heart poor. We need to reassess the situation and reassess our lives. We consider ourselves the most evolved of life forms, and yet we act like we are the most disconnected from the whole of life. We take everything for granted, and we don't show gratitude for all the blessings we receive. Sometimes when people say thank you, it sounds like they really don't mean it. It's a real pity. Let me tell you one story about a little insect from whom we could all learn something. I missed breakfast one morning when we were going to pay a visit to an elderly couple who were moving to live with their children. We were going to pray at their family altar, which they had devotedly tended for many years. We would then move it to the new location in their children's home. I had left a steamed bun in my room uneaten before departing from Bukokuji. I packed the bun in my bag, planning to eat it on the road. Later, when I got hungry in the car, I pulled it out of my bag and started to unwrap it, and there I found a little cockroach munching away on the bun. We stopped the car, and I was just about to put the cockroach and the bun outside in the grass when I realized what I was doing. As long as he was happily munching away, the little cockroach would be fine. But once his stomach was full, he'd look around and find himself in a strange place, out in the world, all by himself. Or he might find himself lost and lonely, without his mother and father, and brother and sisters. I put him back into my bag, wrapping him loosely in the paper with the bun, saying, "You come on this trip with me." This seems rather foolish, doesn't it? Little insects don't have mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, and yet there's something about this that's very touching, and it reminds me of Ryokan, who his Buddhist name meant great fool. Great fool. And Issa, the great haiku poet, who would take the fleas off his body when he was out of his clothing when he was going to wash his robe, and put them down on a piece of paper in the sunlight. And then once he had washed his robe and it was clean, he put the fleas back in his clothing so they'd be able to continue their flea life. Also, he almost burned his hut down once because there were 3 bamboo shoots growing up under the veranda. And so at first he drilled holes through the veranda so that the shoots could continue to grow. And then he tried to burn a hole in the roof as they continued to grow and almost burned his whole hut down. Such a respect for life, life itself. It's like to understand that even the life of a fly, let's say, is beyond our comprehension. To see the life of an apple, I think Thich Nhat Hanh once said you'd have to recreate a universe that would give birth to apples. Things that we take so for granted. Life itself, whatever form it takes, is an immense mystery logic can never explain. And so, to go on, we went about our day praying at the altar in both its original home and in the new one. The children treated us to a nice meal, and we drove back to Bukokuji. As soon as I returned to my room, I opened the paper with the bun in it to find that the cockroach wasn't crushed, and I was very glad. I apologized to it for dragging it off on this long, tiring journey, and together with the bun, I put him in the corner of my room, just as he had been. When I sat down to work at my table, I heard a rustling sound. I looked down to see the little cockroach come right before me on the table, directly before me, and facing me, it stopped. Then it seemed to lower its head as if to bow and say, "Thank you." I put it back in the corner with its bun, and I went back to what I was doing. But again, I looked down to see that it had followed me back and was standing straight before me again with an attitude of gratitude, as if to say, "Thank you for caring for me. Thank you for guarding me this day." There was no doubt that the cockroach was expressing its gratitude to me for having safely brought it home. It had understood and appreciated the compassion shown to it. I took it back to its bun again, saying, I understand what you're saying. It's okay, it's okay. It didn't come back again, and later on I saw that it was enjoying its family, the 10 or so cockroaches who were living in the corner of my room. I was amazed and moved. The cockroach understood and made an effort to come right in front of me to say thank you. Its attitude of gratitude was so sincere. I couldn't help but think that here we are, human beings, blessed with so much goodness and care, and we often spend our days complaining and dissatisfied. We could learn something from that cockroach. If we are embroiled in dissatisfaction and objections, even this little cockroach could laugh at us. We have a saying, those who appreciate blessings are few. Those who realize the value of sacred life are few indeed. That is why we have to give our all to practice. We have to break through our selfish disposition and be able to appreciate all the things we're blessed with. Appreciate life itself. Giving our all to Zazen is showing gratitude. We have to be able to practice in this way. During Zazen, a kind heart must fill your every breath. Each one doing is repaying the debt of gratitude to all the mothers and fathers who have given us birth. One doing, this one breath, this one this one, this one, this one, hello, this one sip of tea and its taste, not just the sip, the taste. Our self falls away into each doing, one doing. The 10,000 things step in and are the self. This is the fundamental point. Now, here's a weird story for you in light of this. Many years ago, I was doing a 7-day session with Kapleau-Roshi at Mountain Cloud. No, at, what was the name of the place? Sasaki Roshi's place that we rented. Bodhi Mandala, in the Jemez Mountains of New Mexico. And during the break, it was in a canyon, a narrow canyon, and wonderful, great thing was behind the Zendo, a little river ran over rapids, rocks, boulders, right behind the Zendo. So all day when you were sitting in the Zendo, you'd hear the stream flowing. And it would, more than a stream, a little river. And it would kind of wash your mind clear. And there were hot springs that you could jump into at break or night. More, or at the end of session, I don't remember exactly, it was years ago. But during breaks, you could go out and sit beside the river. The water would just be flowing right there. And the sound of the river would fill everything, and it would take all your thoughts away, all your sense of myself in here and the world out there, completely washed clean, washed away. And one day during one of the breaks during the session, I was sitting by the river, and it was almost like you could hear this little voice calling, help, help, help. And I looked out, and there was this big grasshopper, about, like this big, 4 inches maybe, being washed down the river at a very fast pace, a kind of furious pace. And I reached in, and I cupped it, and I brought the grasshopper out. And it was this honest sensation, almost like prehistoric. There was this grasshopper. It was pretty big. It filled my whole hand, sitting on my palm, its head cocked to one side, the way a dog might do, when a dog goes. Looking up at me with these big compound eyes and its antenna, and just looking up at me. And I really did, and this is years and years before I ever read this piece by Tangen Roshi, felt this weird sense of gratitude from this tiny, totally non-human being, which I then set down in the grass among the boulders and the grass and the hard, kind of dry dirt of New Mexico beside the river. And it sat there for a while, just kept looking at me, and then eventually hopped and flopped away. But it was this odd sense of connection, and especially in sesshin, when your mind is so emptied of all our habitual involvement, engagement, usually things about ourselves, and that was gone. It was a real strange little experience, a moment. And so when I read this story of the cockroach, in one sense it seems absurd, naive, bizarre. In another sense, it made perfect sense. So maybe think about any moments in your life where you felt that kind of connection, the strangeness of life itself. It is very strange. So leaving home, quite often people talk to me and complain about their life situation. Some of them say, if I didn't have so many duties, surely I could go deeper in my zazen. Or if only I could become a monk, then I could practice seriously. Of course, that is not to say that you shouldn't make changes in your life that would support your practice. Following the guidance of a realized teacher is indispensable. Being able to attend sesshin is also a great blessing. To join this gathering of people who've come together with the aim to understand this most important matter, this great matter, is a precious opportunity. However, when people bring these types of complaints to me, I try to point out to them that the only real obstacle they have is that they blame their life circumstances for their inability to practice wholeheartedly and awaken. Becoming a monk or not is not the most important factor. We have two extreme examples that point this out. The first is of someone who had a deep karmic connection with the Buddha himself, his own cousin, Ananda. For many years, Ananda stayed by Shakyamuni Buddha's side as his attendant, hearing his teachings and receiving Shakyamuni's instructions from morning to night, day after day. He was very bright and had a great memory. In fact, he's known as he of perfect memory, from whom all the sutras have come to us, because he remembered exactly what the Buddha said and could reproduce it, and then eventually those were written down much later, but they all came orally. The opening of Teisho was every sutra is, "Thus have I heard, thus have I heard," and that's Ananda's voice. It's him repeating what he heard. He was very bright and had a great memory. He could hear Shakyamuni's words once and record them perfectly, like a computer. He could repeat them entirely if needed. He was right at the Buddha's feet, and though he could feel the breath from Shakyamuni's nose as he breathed, Ananda could not let go. He was not able to receive the transmission of truth from the Buddha. He grasped for dear life at the idea of himself, and when Shakyamuni was on his deathbed, Ananda cried in great despair and cried himself into oblivion. We see his reclining form in the paintings that depict the Buddha's parinirvana. Everyone is crying as Shakyamuni gives his last teisho, but they're listening intently. Ananda had not been able to awaken yet, and the Buddha was dying. Ananda was concerned with his own welfare, and this is clearly the reason he could not awaken to Shakyamuni's Dharma. He had the intention to listen and practice sincerely and wholeheartedly, but he continued to hold himself most dear. He continued to see himself as the center of the world. Now, that's not always how I've heard it. My sense is in part that he was such a sensitive person. He had such respect for the Buddha. He couldn't let go of his feeling for the Buddha as a person rather than to really hear the teaching and awaken himself. And it wasn't until the Buddha had died that he could bring himself to step past the Buddha and awaken to his own Buddha nature. Otherwise, the Buddha was too important a figure for him to do anything but revere the Buddha rather than truly understand the implication of the Buddha's teaching for himself in his own life. So when the council met after the Buddha's death in order to record the teachings of all those who had awakened to Shakyamuni's teachings, those people were all invited, but Ananda was not, even though he had been able to repeat all the Buddha's words. If one joined who had not received the very life of the Buddha, that unawakened student's words could not be completely trusted. Mahakashapa, the Buddha's senior disciple, and was then the heir of the Buddha, received Dharma transmission from the Buddha, knew he had to do something to help Ananda awaken. So Mahakashapa was inside a room with the door locked and told Ananda to come in. And at that moment, the legend goes, you can take this as you will, Ananda easily entered through the keyhole. The meaning is that if you are grasping at an idea of self, you won't be able to enter. But if you drop your self-centeredness, that is, let fall away all concepts of body and mind, then you can enter, no matter how small the opening. A Zen dialogue goes, a monk came to a teacher and asked, how can I enter the way? The teacher said, do you hear the sound of the stream? The monk or the student said, yes, I do. The Buddha said, the teacher rather said, enter there. Do you hear the sound of the air conditioner? Enter there. How can I enter the way? Ananda, come through the keyhole. He could. Monks in Zen tradition are known as unsui. It means clouds and water, because they don't go, this is me, this is who I am. No, like clouds and water, we form and reform according to causes and conditions. That is, you can take the shape, like clouds and water, of any container. Any life situation is your container. You're formed by it, this very moment, into your sense of who and what you are. This shifts as the container shifts. Clouds and water flow unimpeded. Ananda enters through the keyhole. Once the sense of me, myself, and I is no longer center stage, then our ability to adjust to changing circumstances and find great space in small opportunities becomes part of our ordinary living. So the meaning is that if you're grasping in an idea of self, you won't be able to enter. If you've cast off body and mind, then you can't come in. Ananda finally saw there was something more important than his own life. All of Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings were at stake. Now Ananda was invited to the council, and he was able to faithfully repeat the Buddha's words. All those present nodded in assent to Ananda's recitation, but his awakening didn't come through being blessed with a perfect practice situation. It came from his final resolution after the Buddha had already passed away. To be honest, none of us are going to be in a perfect practice situation. We're lay people. We're not isolated from the world. We have family responsibilities. We have work responsibilities. We have responsibilities as citizens, as citizens of a nation, as citizens of a planet. We're never going to be free of these things. But for us, that is the perfect situation. These very things help us to grow up as human beings, not by evading them, but by working with them and continuing to find ways to practice from within the very ground we now live on. This is the foundation of our practice. Not isolation and not being set off in a monastery separate from others, but in this very life. This is our challenge. And it's an important challenge because our practice needs to function in this world. Look around. Look at the amount of greed, anger, and ignorance running rampant in our culture and the consequences in terms of actual human lives and animal lives and plant lives and mountain lives and water lives. It's horrifying. And at the same time, Tangen Roshi is saying, this is the most wonderful life. Be grateful for it. These are very hard things to reconcile, but this is our challenge, to be whole. On the other hand, there was an elderly woman in the hospital for stomach surgery. Her priest, a member of the Pure Land school, told her to chant Namu Amida Butsu over and over. He came to call on her in the hospital a week later and saw that her practice wasn't going well. She didn't have the strength to move her mouth and repeat the chant. He then told her to just be one with the noisy alarm clock at her side. Tick, tick, tick. And so she did just that. Carefully, with full attention, she continued to be one with the clock. She did it with all her heart, and she attained realization. The priest came to visit her again, and she thanked him from the bottom of her heart. Thanks to you, thanks to everything, she was able to say. She could continue to live in the Pure Land now, here. She was an extremely ill elderly woman who had just had major surgery, but it didn't stop her from realizing the way. Walking the path of practice sincerely, step by step, this is what leaving home really means. We usually act from the standpoint of self. We believe ourselves to be independent, fixed entities making our way through this world, and we seek only to defend, pamper, and nurture ourselves. Well, that's true, but we also seek to take care of ourselves, and that's certainly legitimate. That's not to downplay the needs of this self for recreation, for food, for shelter, for a sense of purpose in life, for taking care of the things that mean things to us. This is all part of it. Remember, Tangen was really a pure monastic with a very strong aspiration, given the life he had come out of. We are not him. So we have to think about the things he says, as wonderful as they are. We usually act, leaving home is renouncing that self-centeredness, and certainly that is true. That pent-up, pitiful, enclosed me is dropped, and that is certainly true. Becoming a monk means vowing to work for all beings, not for some falsely assumed and enclosed me. But of course, becoming a monk is a literal, but it's also not a literal meaning. It means to be really practicing maturely. You might be a monk, you might be a layperson. Both would have the same kind of understanding of this very life is the ground of my practice. The point is dropping my habitual return to the fundamental solar system that's internal, with me as the sun and everybody and everything else, the planets revolving around this me. That falls away. That is leaving home, because that's the home base we're conditioned to. So, means opening your heart to all beings. This is the decision that is made to work for the benefit of all beings. It is the most natural decision, because true life is the perfect interdependence of all beings. Each being arises thanks to all beings. When you have realized this, when you've accepted this, you can't help but want to be here for all beings. This world of blessings that you receive is naturally transformed into devotion. Devotion is expressed through your dedicated practice. Devotion is making this one step. Remember the great writer and aviator, pioneer really, Saint-Exupéry, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He wrote The Little Prince. He wrote Wind, Sand, and Stars. In the, I find, terrific book of his Flight to Arras, a very thin book, he spoke about why he continued to fly reconnaissance missions for the French during World War II, even though he realized he would probably die doing it, and even though he was considered a national treasure, and was told and asked and begged many times to give that up and return to writing. He said, no, I'm a pilot, my job is to fly. In one of his books, Wind, Sand, and Stars, he talks about his friend, Mermetz was his name, who early in the days where they're flying open biplanes to deliver the mail across the Andes, he crashed. He walked out. No one had ever done it. His body was ravaged, his feet completely frostbitten. He made it out from Andean heights in ice and snow. And it was in terrible shape, and Saint-Exupéry visited him in the hospital, and he asked about, how did you do it? And he said, I took one step and then I took another. And Saint-Exupéry wrote about this and said, what saves a person is to take a step. It's always the same step. This breath, this count, this koan. There's nothing different. You're doing it again and again. He said, it's always the same step, but you have to take it. And this can be done while cooking, while answering the phone, while walking, while lying down to rest. It doesn't mean you have to shed everything and run off to a monastery to do this. But it's the same step. And thinking about it isn't the same as simply doing it. Breath by breath, moment by moment, in whatever situation you find yourself. Devotion is making this one step. Regardless of your outer garments, this is the meaning of leaving home. That is, whether you're wearing a robe, whether you're wearing blue jeans, whether you're wearing a three-piece suit, whether you're wearing a dress, doesn't matter. Regardless of your outer garments. In doing this practice, the me notion, that is the concept of me, it doesn't mean you get rid of yourself. It means attachment to the concept of yourself falls away. It's dropped. If one person has this aspiration, giving their life in devotion to this one truth, to the deep faith in the teaching of all the Buddhas, that person has left home. This is becoming a monk in your heart. There's a Zen saying, it's better to shave the heart than shave the head. Of course, there's nothing wrong with shaving the head, but if that's where you stop, you'd be better off shaving the heart of all your own issues, of your greed, anger, ignorance, self-centeredness. Shaving that away is much more important than shaving the head. Of course, there's nothing wrong with shaving your head, but if that's all you do, that's simply the outer form, and that's not enough. And you don't need to shave your head to shave the heart. If one has this aspiration, giving one's life in devotion to this one truth, to the deep faith in the teaching of all the Buddhas, you've left home. This is becoming a monk in your heart. There is also physically giving one's body to become a monk, but following the path of liberation is truly leaving home. Some monks may not have left home, though they've literally left home. Some lay people have truly left home, though they haven't left family or home at all. That's the point he's making. It's the inner work that you bring to it, and your own desire to realize the way. We walk the Buddha way. We are in the process of attaining the way. This is the path of awakening. When you have resolved to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings, once your aspiration is true and genuine, then the true and genuine practice, is certain to follow. If your aspiration is not genuine, your practice will not be genuine. It's very straightforward. Again, this is very Japanese and very monkish. It can seem harsh, and yet his point is true. If you make up your mind to do something, the odds are much better you'll do it than if you think, well, maybe I will, maybe I won't. I won't say that won't work for you, but the odds are that's not going to have the same effect as making up your mind and trying with all your might of what's truly possible for you in this very life to realize as a human being, whatever your outer form might be. It is said that when one sole person becomes a monk, that is, drop self-centeredness, that's what he means by becoming a monk. It doesn't mean necessarily shaving your head or wearing certain kind of robes. When one person drops self-centeredness, 9 generations of relations attained rebirth in heavenly realms. This is a traditional Buddhist teaching. Relations here means people with whom we have close karmic connections, parents, children, siblings, but far more others, distant relations too, are saved, by this one truth brought to life. All beings are working together. In mutual devotion, all beings are deeply, fundamentally related. You know, in Tibetan Buddhism, it says that each being has already been our own mother and father. This, again, is very hard to take in, but if you've ever seen the wonderful movie 7 Years in Tibet, I think it's a great performance by Brad Pitt, who plays Heinrich Harrer, who was a German mountain climber when the Second World War broke out. He was captured by the British, put in a British prison camp in India. He eventually escaped, made his way unbelievably to Tibet, which was not allowing any foreigners in at all, and became very close with the young Dalai Lama. And they stayed friends. And until Hara's death, even many, many years later, they stayed close friends. In any case, at one point, the young Dalai Lama asked Hara, who was quite technically proficient, to build him a movie house. He really liked movies. He wanted to see documentaries about the world. He had this sense that he was going to be out in the world. This is when Tibet was quite isolated. And so Heinrich Harrer sets up with all these Tibetan guys to dig ditches, to lay in cables, and they used the generator of an old car to run the equipment. That was the source of electricity, the battery in the car and the generator. They would run the engine in the car. Anyway, so all these guys, and many of them were monks, are digging in the ground, and he notices the work is going very, very slowly. And he looks at it and he goes, what? And they're picking up each worm and each bug that they find as they dig these ditches to lay the cables for the movie theater. And they're carrying them distance away, and then they dig a little hole and they get water and they pour it in and they protect the worm or the bug and they put it back in the ground. And he goes, what are you doing? I mean, we're never going to get this done. You dig a hole, we put in the cable. No, Heinrich Harrer, you don't understand. These worms might have been our mother or father. We can't treat them like that. We must take care of these worms. They are our parents. And it's this very touching moment where he comes face to face as a very technological Westerner with this ingrained, very Buddhist sense that all beings, taken quite literally, have already been our mother or father in some past life. And so our relationships with everything karmically is much more complex than the surface of life seems to be. Something to think about in terms of all the people we interact with in our life, and the animals we interact with in our life, and the children and parents and siblings and relatives, and who we get along with and who we don't get along with and who we like and do it. Well, what if each one has already been our mother or father in some past existence? I mean, that's very humbling, isn't it? Even the worms, even the cockroach eating its bun. So, to go on, let's see. It is said that when one sole person becomes a monk, 9 generations of relations attain rebirth in heavenly realms. Relations here, that's right, we did that. So all beings are working together. All beings are deeply, fundamentally related. Through your deep aspiration, your intense practice, and your awakening. And again, practice is not just practice, it is the practice of realization. It's the realization of practice. So we always call it practice realization. We're not just practicing, and the aim isn't just calmness. The aim is realization, dropping away of all concepts of body and mind and finding out that this crack in the pavement is my own self, this tree is my own nature, this book on the bookshelf is speaking my own name, this river is my own blood, this cloud is my own thought. It's that intimate. When ideas of ourselves fall away, we discover an intimate world. Intimacy. Aitken Roshi really looked into the etymology, and in China, realization or enlightenment intimacy really means the same thing. So it's not that you get something called enlightenment, it's that you fall away. And the world becomes so intimate, it steps into you and is me. This is the point, and it creates so much delusion to think I'm going to get enlightened, and yet we have to start with that, because that motivates us in the lives we start with, to really work towards intimacy with all life, with all beings, including ourselves, just as we are. In any case, to go on, the great example is Shakyamuni, the world-honored one, who said, all the three worlds are my own home, the worlds of past, present, future, the worlds of desire, form, and formlessness. All living beings are my own dear, beloved children, all beings. The vow to let go of everything is made for all time. If you earnestly desire to lay down everything to know truth, that desire reverberates through all lifetimes and is never lost. If you practice with this mind, no matter what your circumstances are, you will be able to awaken to your essential Buddha nature. If you earnestly desire to lay down everything to know truth, that doesn't mean get rid of responsibilities. It doesn't mean disappear from your children. It doesn't mean give up your relationships. That's not what it means. But if you earnestly desire to lay down your clinging to all these things as that's who I am, that's all I am, to know truth, that desire reverberates through all lifetimes and is never lost. Leonard Cohen has a great line in a song called In My Secret Life. He says, I smile when I'm angry, I lie and I cheat. I do what I lie and I steal. I do what I have to, I do what I have to do to get by. I steal and I lie, or I cheat and I lie. I do what I have to do to get by. I'm always alone and my heart is like ice, I think he says, but I die for the truth in my secret life. People may think you're some kind of crumb or mean person or whatever. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But if you have this aspiration to awaken for the sake of all beings, you die for the truth in your inner life, in your secret life. It's not like, oh, you look so pleasant and nice on the outside, but in your secret life you're really a monster. It's the reverse. You can seem harsh, you can seem whatever, but maybe you're trying to do your best, and in your secret life, you're really working to die for the truth. You do that. It's put on your plate, you do it. That's very interesting. Leonard Cohen was such an interesting writer. In any case, this is never lost, this desire to really awaken for the sake of all, and willingness to do what you have to do to accomplish that as best you can in your own circumstance. If you practice with this in mind, no matter what your circumstances are, you will be able to awaken to your essential Buddha nature. So we'll stop here, and I will turn this around so we face the Buddha and the 11-headed Avalokiteshvara on our altar. We will remain there through the rest of the year in our difficult world.